We begin with newly revealed secrets of the infamous Sicilian Mafia. After centuries, the code of silence is starting to break down as some Sicilians are joining prosecutors in an effort to quell the power of organized crime. Jerry Capeci, the gangland columnist for the New York Daily News, recently returned from Sicily. His report from the front lines of the latest mob war appeared on Sunday and Monday. Closer to home, Jerry is also a co-author of Murder Machine, the true story of one of New York's most vicious gangs. We're very pleased to have him back, and as I said to you, it's about time.
It's good to be back, Charlie.
This is a fascinating story. Tell me about why you wanted to go to your grandfather grew up in Sicily.
Right. My grandparents on my mother's side were born in and lived in Camporeale, which is a small town, about 20 miles from Palermo. And I had always wanted to go there. But something always managed to get in the way and prevent it. And here it was that my editors assigned me to cover, mafia terror in Sicily. While I was thinking about the assignment and while I was preparing for the assignment, in the back of my mind, and it came to the front of my mind quite frequently, I became really excited about, going to touch my roots for the first time ever. The first time ever in Sicily. I'd been to Italy before, but never managed to get to Sicily. And it was a fascinating experience, to say the least.
Put now the context for us, the Sicilian organized crime, mafia, whatever we call it, and how they are, and the recent developments with the killing of those two much honored judges now, which has so inflamed the Sicilian and the Italian people against organized crime, and maybe at long last making a difference.
Well, that's exactly right, Charlie. I think that what has happened is that the Sicilian people have said enough is enough. And that was the sense that I got from speaking to the people of Palermo and Corleone, as well as the law enforcement officials of Italy and of the United States who were stationed there. Giovanni Falcone was much more than just a judge or a prosecutor. He was a national hero. He basically exposed the mafia from '84 to '87, as killers without honor. They called themselves men of honor, and he was the first one to really expose the mafia. They've been killing judges and prosecutors in Sicily for 15 years at least. But there has been this myth that they don't kill innocent people and that they don't kill women and children and they don't kill relatives of others just to, for vengeance. But they've been doing it for a really a long time. And I think the Sicilian people just, became, they just accepted it. But Falcone was he was a step above everybody else. He was the law. I mean, since he exposed the mafia for, for what they were, the people really became upset.
And was putting some of them in jail.
Right, he put a lot of them, he put over 150, 200 of them in jail, and he had an effect. And then when he was killed, and then 2 months later, Paolo Borsellino was killed, and he was going to replace, he was going to be the new Falcone. I think the people finally said enough is enough. There were 5 bodyguards were killed when Borsellino was killed. Many people that I spoke to on Via D'Amelio said that, if it hadn't been a Sunday afternoon, we could have been killed. Everybody was out at the beach. And I think they decided that, keeping silent for all these years, over 100 years, hasn't really helped. Innocent people are dying anyway.
Are they now stepping forward?
They are stepping forward. They have, in the Falcone bombing, for instance, they actually helped the police with, they volunteered and gave them information to help make a sketch. They did help also in the Borsellino bombing, and the police did make an arrest of the person who was suspected of driving the car there that was loaded with dynamite.
How would the organized crime in Sicily think they could get away with killing this man? What is the nature of their power that you can do that? Because it's always, I thought, an unwritten rule. Certainly it's not true in Colombia with some of the drug gangs, lords down there, and certainly, but it seems to be true in the United States that organized crime does not hit governmental officials. A different rule there?
Definitely. In fact, Sicilians that I spoke to and Italians in Rome that I spoke to view the American version of the mafia as much more elegant, was a word that they used, much more class. John Gotti, for example, during his trial earlier this year, was his smiling face appeared on television as the local news commentator reported the day's happenings in the trial, and people in Sicily looked at him as somewhat of the folk hero that New Yorkers viewed him as until he was finally convicted. And the reason for it is the American mafia does not have what's called a vendetta transversale, which is the method of getting vengeance by killing friends and relatives of people who are, suspected informers.
How is that organized crime in Sicily different from organized crime in the United States, other than that, in terms of how they get their money, what activities are they involved in, and how do they maintain, in addition to what you just said, their control?
Well, obviously they maintain the control over fear. But one of the key differences between both the mafia in Sicily and here in the United States is the numbers involved. For example, in Sicily, which is 5 million people approximately, there are an estimated 10,000 made mafia members. That averages out to about one mobster for each 500 or so citizens.
Organized along similar lines, though, with one head and then different families and then
similar. There are 187 mafia families in Sicily, 20 to 23 in Palermo alone, which is the capital of 1 million people. Each of some of those mafia families, to be honest, are similar to I guess we'd call street gangs here. In small towns, you have a mafia family of 3 people, and some of the bigger cities, obviously, there are many more members of families.
And who is this guy that's head of the Sicilian Mafia who has not been seen for, 20 years?
Right, Salvatore Riina. He hasn't been seen since 1969. He was acquitted of a triple homicide in 1969 and then went underground. And the latest picture that the officials, law enforcement, has of him is something like 30 years old. Since he has gone underground, he has raised a family. He's married. Yeah. He's raised a family, 4 children. And people swear that they don't know who he is, and yet his lawyer has told officials and has told the press that he knows where he is and he can get him if he needs him. Apparently, in Italy, the laws regarding harboring or obstruction of justice for lawyers is a little bit less stringent or strict than it is here in the United States. In fact, the laws are another thing that has certainly changed the Italians' ability to go after in the mafia, because in the last 2 years...
They have no RICO statute?
They don't have a RICO statute, but only within the last 2 years have they adopted many of the laws and methods that the FBI and DEA have been using in the United States.
Is there
for
much
the last
consultation
15 years.
among law enforcement and going back and forth between Italy and Sicily and the United States?
Definitely, and as right now there is a contingent of FBI agents in Sicily, but there is a steady contingent in Rome of FBI and DEA agents.
Yeah. Do they believe now, because of the outcry over the murder of Falcone and Borsellino, that they can get Riina, that somehow they'll break through and find him?
Well, they've told me that they're pulling out all the stops, and they believe that the resolve of the people is what will help them do it.
And even using the military or not?
Well, they are using the military. The military is basically there to protect Ucciardone prison, that area, and to...
Which is where they're holding all those mafias.
Exactly, where a lot of the convicted mafiosi are being held, and also to stabilize the situation and to, make the people feel a little bit more safe than they had been. The Carabinieri, which is a paramilitary organization, it's kind of they have police and military functions, is involved in the operation, but now there's a new, it's called a federal law enforcement agency. It's the DIA. It's based on the FBI and DEA concept.
The principal export to the United States by organized crime and the mafia in Sicily is heroin.
It was heroin for an awful long time, up until very recently. Right now, the Pizza Connection case and subsequent cases in the United States and in Italy have kind of derailed the Palermo to New York and to the United States heroin trade. What the Sicilian Mafia has done now is use its proximity to European markets and is now shipping more to European markets.
And shipping heroin or shipping cocaine from the Cali and from the Medellin gang?
Well, they're shipping cocaine here. What they've done is they've joined forces with the Medellin and Cali cartels and are shipping cocaine here and heroin outside.
And what's their relationship to organized crime in the United States? I mean, one interesting thing that you came out of your piece is that somebody said you comparing Riina to John Gotti is like it's like Gotti's an altar boy compared to the violence and the methods used by Riina and the amount of killing attributed to him.
Exactly.
But he's made deals with, and his agents have come here to make deals for the distribution of drugs.
Definitely, no question about it. The great mafia war of the early 1980s was won by Riina and his Corleonese family and the mafia families who supported him. And subsequent to that, he sent an emissary to New York who then began to ship heroin to the Sicilian faction of the Gambino crime family, which is John Gotti's crime family, which is headed by John and Joseph Gambino of Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. This is according to the Italian law enforcement officials and according to court papers in the Gambino's case here in Manhattan.
Before I leave this story, you go back to where your grandmother's people had lived. You go to the house where they resided,
Right.
Which is now not occupied.
Exactly. Well, my grandfather's house was damaged by the earthquake. My grandmother's house, where each of them grew up as teenagers, wasn't, and it was the kind of a contrast. My grandfather had always told me about how Sicily. He remembered the famine and the poverty and how people had to pay too many taxes.
Yeah. And they call the tax what they call it,
Pizzo,
which is the money that's going to the protection to the mafia.
Protection money.
Were you scared? Because there is some sense that reporters who are too nosy don't necessarily survive.
Well, I was a little bit more tense in Palermo than operating here in New York.
Did you go around asking about Riina and trying to find out who he was and stories about him?
Well, I asked people about him. I tried to find out from residents of Corleone and Palermo what they thought of him.
Are they willing to talk?
Very few were willing to talk to me when I was standing there with a notebook. Even as, I was a reporter, I let them know that I wasn't interested in telling anyone here in the United States, in Sicily, or even using their names, but they were very reluctant to talk to me when I had a notebook and was taking notes. Subsequently, I put the notebook away and did conduct some interviews and then immediately run back to try and, get it down verbatim.
I'm out of time, but how goes, can you tell me in 30 seconds, how goes the negotiation between you and Mort Zuckerman and his representative, you as a representative of the Guild?
Well, we're very disappointed in the fact that Zuckerman seems to have, he's using a meat axe on us, whereas he's used a scalpel to gently cut out a few people, few jobs from the other critics.
So the question is really job security.
Job security and the numbers of jobs. He's looking to knock off 175 Guild workers, and whereas he hasn't asked for even a fraction of that for all the other craft unions. We can't understand why he's really out to get us. It just makes no sense to us.
We'll talk more about that at another time. Thank you. The book Murder Machine is a true story. We'll talk about that at another time, too.